Well, welcome, dear friends. I'm John, Father John Deere, and welcome to this nice session of the Beatitude Center with our special guest, my friend, Professor Michael Nagler from the Meta Center. You're very welcome, Michael, and you're all welcome here. And just a reminder, I'm hoping Michael will speak for 45 or 60 minutes or whatever he wants, and then we'll have time for question and answers, and we'll end at the hour and a half mark. And if you haven't, please um, go ahead and mute yourself out of respect for everybody. If you just please do that. I see you, David. Welcome. I'm muting you.
Hi, David. Mute that guy.
I muted David Hartso before we're okay. So let's begin with a little 2-second prayer, and then I'll welcome our special guest. So, dear friends, go ahead and let's just relax for a minute and take a deep breath and notice how you're feeling. We're coming to those who are watching the recording on Saturday, April 13th, 2024. I was just saying, I'm coming to you from Detroit, the funeral this morning of my friend, the great peacemaker, Bishop Thomas Gumbleton. And so I celebrate and give thanks for his amazing peacemaking life. So let's take a moment and in silence and ask for whatever graces we need to continue our journey as peacemakers on the path of total nonviolence and universal love. Beloved God of peace, thank you for all the blessings of life and love and peace that you give us. Be with us as we reflect with our friend Michael on the great call to live and practice and teach and spread your way of active, creative nonviolence. And inspire us, bless us, energize us, and send us forth that we might be your holy peacemakers, teachers and practitioners of nonviolence, that we might do our part to help end war, injustice, racism, gun violence, execution, sexism, poverty, greed, nuclear weapons, and environmental destruction, that we might welcome your reign of universal love, universal compassion, universal peace, and total nonviolence here on earth. And we ask this in the name of the nonviolent Jesus. So, friends, again, I'm very pleased to introduce you to a friend of mine, Dr. Michael Nagler, one of our great teachers of nonviolence in our country. And Michael is a professor emeritus of peace studies at UC Berkeley and founder of its program. And he's an author, lecturer, and founder and president of the Meta Center for Nonviolence, which I encourage all of you to look up. Metacenter.org, METTA center.org. Michael's the author of several great books, including The Nonviolence Handbook, A Guide for Practical Action. Well, there you go, everybody. We can get that. The Search for a Nonviolent Future, wonderful book. I think his latest book, The Third Harmony, Nonviolence and the New Story of Human Nature. It's wonderful. And I've asked him to talk to us and teach us about nonviolence, especially from the Gandhian Kingian perspective. And given our, this terrible time and crisis of violence that we're living in, and any of your latest thoughts, Michael, and basic teachings and energy and inspiration that you can give us that we can continue the journey and practice of nonviolence. So, dear friends, I know a lot of you. Join me in giving a very warm welcome to Professor Mahatma Michael Nagler. The floor is yours, Michael. I'm going to mute myself.
Okay, John. Thank you so much. You want to be a little careful with that Mahatma moniker, but yeah, I am a retired professor from UC Berkeley and spend almost all my time now working on creating nonviolent resources through the Meta Center for nonviolence, and if I remember, and I sometimes do, I'll put up our websites at the end so you can follow up if you wish to. But John has already hit a couple of the notes that I would like to strike with you, and I'm actually going to begin with a rather, let's say, a rather challenging quotation. It's exactly 20 years old now. It was by the great novelist Arundhati Roy, who won the Booker Prize for her novel, The God of Small Things. And she said, and we hosted her at Berkeley. We hosted a lot of great people at Berkeley, like Father John Deere. And she said 20 years ago, we're running out of time, even as we speak. The circle of violence is closing in. Either way, change will come. It could be bloody or it could be beautiful. It depends on us. So I think the way we would express that is we live in a peculiar time, and who knows why we've been chosen to live in this uh, kairos, where both violence and nonviolence are increasing. So, as Arundhati Roy has said, nothing could be more important than for us to put, or more opportune for us to lend our weight to nonviolence. In this culture of ours, we tend to be much more aware of violence than nonviolence, and that is really holding us back. I know I read some years ago that we're exposed to something like 5,000 commercial messages a day. I said, no, that can't be true. I was in New York at the time, got out of the subway at 23rd Street, started walking north, and by the time I had got 5 blocks counting the commercial messages as I went, I realized that was an understatement. And for reasons which I'm going to try to get into, there's a correlation between the propaganda of commercialism on the one hand and its expression in violent behaviors, violent attitudes on the other hand. So we let me talk a little bit about the qualitative increase in violence. I'm going to get past this part of the talk quickly and get to the nonviolence. But just to mention a few examples, in the recent weeks that we have had 2 attacks on embassies, which are supposed to be inviolable. There was Israel's attack on the Syrian embassy, which was fatal attack, and now just today, Ecuador has launched an attack on the Mexican embassy in Quito, and we're seeing other violations of international law, especially in Gaza. And so the question we have to ask ourselves is why is violence on the rise? And I think that a powerful hint was given by the late Norman Cousins, the editor of Saturday Review of Literature, which toward the end of its career came to be called the Saturday Review of Everything But Literature, because it was all about progressive politics. But anyway, he once remarked that we really have no agreed upon definition of human nature. And this is the big stumbling block to human progress. Until we can figure out who we are, we will not be able to go forward. And that means going out of the maelstrom of violence into a world of nonviolence. But it's not that complicated, really, about who we are, or at least you can reduce it to a formula which is both simple and useful. And this is by no means original to me. And that formula is we are body, mind, and spirit. I don't even think that's controversial. That may be one of the few things I'm going to say this morning that is not controversial. But what seems to be the difficulty with it is that we have adopted, without discussing it somehow throughout the whole culture, a model that a physics professor at Oregon called Amit Goswami would call upward causality. That is, we believe that matter is the fundamental reality, and from matter somehow, nobody's ever been able to explain this at all, generates mind and consciousness. But what Amit Goswami says, by contrast, is really creation flows downward from spirit, from consciousness, through our individual consciousness to matter. And this has everything to do with nonviolence. For one simple reason, matter is essentially separate. I was taught in public school and again in high school and again in college. All of this quite a while ago, but we won't mention the numbers here. I was taught that no two bodies could occupy the same space at the same time, and I have no objection to that. But I was never taught that I was not a body. That's where the difficulty comes in. So as bodies, we are separate. As minds, we are potentially in harmony. Right now, all 50 of us, or 25 of us who are here on the screen, are resonating with a similar set of ideas and feelings behind those ideas. So our minds are in a harmonic state. And there is now science to back this up. There's I almost said a famous experiment. I wish it were a famous experiment. Anyway, it was an experiment where people were put in a room together and instructed to meditate for about 25 minutes. Then they were taken out and separated pretty widely. One of them might go to a different building. But both of them then were wired up by, fMRI, magnetic resonance imagery, to record brain activity. And one of those two people was shown a flashing light, blip, blip, blip. So his or her brain was going blip, blip, blip. Guess what, friends? The other person's brain was doing the same thing, even though he or she was not seeing that flashing light. So I just mentioned that as one of many little many little ways that science is now focusing on this mysterious phenomenon of our brain and the even more mysterious phenomenon of consciousness. So what I've come to believe is that as bodies, we are naturally separate. There might be some surface contact, but it doesn't go deeper than that. As minds, we can resonate. And as consciousness, we are one. There are no divisions in consciousness, and they cannot be because consciousness, whatever it is, does not operate in space-time. So it's a mystery how something that exists in space-time, our physical realities, our bodies, can interact with something that does not. But it does. So while on the one hand, we have these increases in violence, we now have lots of potential for, and also here and there, an actual realization of increases in nonviolence. I'm just hearing a lot of buzzing suddenly. That's not just me.
I'm working on it, Michael. Keep
Okay.
going.
Okay, John,
Sorry
thank you.
about that. Yeah.
You've got my back, man. You always have. So I want to illustrate four different ways that we are in an advantageous position now with regard to this all-important question of elevating and enhancing the nonviolence potential in human nature. First of all, as I say, there is a metaphysical background for this in science, and that does matter. Our good friend Willis Harman used to say that science is the knowledge validating system of our civilization. So, in other words, if something isn't scientific, we won't believe that it's true. Now, I really don't have time to go into this in great detail, and that's fortunate because I don't understand it and do not relish making a fool of myself. But what is clear and should be clear to even non-scientists among us is that the discovery 120 years ago of quantum reality is a tremendous potential breakthrough because the exist quanta, the the particles of energy that exist are not limited in space-time until we subject them to certain conditions. You know, I don't know how familiar with this some of you may be, but it's been shown, for example, that light can behave as a particle or as a wave, depending on the equipment that we set up to detect it. And this breakthrough was accomplished really over a period of about, 30 or 40 years in the beginning of the last century, mostly in Germany and by German refugees. And one of them was Max Planck. And he said the following. This will balance Arundhati Roy's quote that I began with. Max Planck, this Nobel-winning physicist, said, "I regard consciousness as fundamental. I regard matter as derivative from consciousness. Everything that we talk about, everything that we regard as existing postulates consciousness." When I was still teaching at Berkeley, I tried to bring this up with some of my colleagues, and I found that there was no better way to end a conversation because consciousness is very difficult for them to define, and B, it really upends our whole model of what the world consists of. The physical model based on Newtonian laws, the behavioral model based on Darwinian evolution, and inevitably this leads to the violence accepting model of human beings and human change. So we have here a potential breakthrough, and I always mention this in my talks. Maybe that's why my talks are so unpopular, uh, because I think that this would be a valuable thing for we who want to create social change in a direction of peace and love should know about. It is useful, even though it seems remote. So the world has, as understood by scientists, has shifted from a material reality to a non-material reality, though that is very difficult to understand. And the best definition of it, I think, is this quote from Max Planck about consciousness. So that's one big potential breakthrough to help us undertake this task. The other, another, is the science of nonviolence itself. When I tried to teach a nonviolence course at Berkeley, again, quite a large number of years ago, uh, the course, there was an experimental program, which, thanks to the free speech movement, was instituted, and I was able to teach this course. I taught it twice, and it was very popular. I had like about 100 students each time. So I said, okay, guys, where do we go from here? What program shall we put this course in? And I went to political science. I said, no, 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 it does not belong here. And I went to sociology, and they said, no, no, we won't touch it. That's a religious course. So we went to religious science, which has recently gotten started, and said, no, we don't want that. So it was up or out for Nagler. If I couldn't teach my nonviolence course, I didn't want to be at that university anymore or any other university, which might make it hard for me to eat and pay my rent and stuff like that. So I went up instead of out, and we created a program in peace and conflict studies in which, thank you, I, as the chairman, accepted my course in nonviolence. I'm telling you this by way of contrast to show you how much progress has actually occurred in the intervening time, the 3 or so decades. I think by the time I left Berkeley, we had about 94 majors in peace and conflict studies, and we were possibly the largest, but far from being the only program in the country. And I believe that there are now something like 230 peace studies programs in American and Canadian universities. Now, all of this work is leading to a better understanding on the intellectual level of what nonviolence is. Many of you, I bet, are familiar with this book by Erica Chenoweth and Maria Stephan. Erica Chenoweth appears in our film, I'm happy to say, and they just applied political science criteria to see whether nonviolence works. They looked at something like, oh, a little over 200 episodes of what they called insurrectionary nonviolence aiming at regime change. So, first of all, as you and I know very well, this is only one application of nonviolence. If you were to, it's the most dramatic one for sure. I mean, you get a dictator out of power. That's pretty impressive stuff. But if you look at our website and look for something called the roadmap, you'll see that there are many, every sector of life, really, there is a way that nonviolence can be applied there. And okay, now I'm going to adopt my label as someone who spouts about Gandhi all the time. Gandhi made a great discovery that even more important than protest and insurrection was what he called constructive program. With constructive program, you can build the systems that you want. Then the systems that you don't want will often tend to go away because they're irrelevant now. They've been superseded. And if they don't, you will be in a very strong position to make them go away. So you take someone like Abdul Ghaffar Khan, Badshah Khan, as he was called, the King of Kings, who operated in the Pashtun area of what is now Afghanistan. He started his great career by building schools. And sure enough, the British told him, you're not allowed to do that. You can't build schools in your own country. We get to build all the schools here. And so sometimes constructive program will bring you in direct contact with structures of injustice, and you'll be in a very strong position at that point to overthrow them. So Chenoweth and Stephan, in their book, Why Civil Resistance Works, they showed that of those 200 plus insurrectionary movements, again, just a sliver of what nonviolence can do, but an important one, they showed that the nonviolent ones were twice as effective than the violent ones. And I'm going to get back in a minute to what I mean by violence and nonviolence in this context. They showed, and this surprised even me, I've been in this business for a while. It surprised me to learn that nonviolent insurrections are typically successful in 1/3 the time that it takes for violent revolutions. Not only that, and this I really do like, I mean, I like all of it, but I like this in particular. Nonviolent insurrections lead to democratic regimes within 10 years down the road, even if they fail. Isn't that startling and intriguing? So you mount a nonviolent resistance, you got to get the dictator out. He wins, you lose, you don't get him out of there. And 10 years later, he's gone anywhere. Anyway, why? Because you have demonstrated a nonviolent capacity in the human spirit. So this is just a hint of the breakthroughs that have come about in the last 20, 30 years in understanding what nonviolence is and how it works and how to apply it. That's the second big plus we have going for us. The third, I'll give you a hint, there's going to be four. The third is, and I expect I'm going to see you smiling now, John. It is the rediscovery of the nonviolent Jesus. Yay! I thought you'd like that one. Yeah, yeah. There is a book that some of you may be familiar with by Jeffrey Nuttall. It's called Christian Pacifism in History. And he shows that there have been five waves throughout historical time, from the time of Jesus to today, of rediscovering the fact that Jesus was violent. Nonviolent, I mean. He was not violent. Gandhi said, and this is going to be, a little bit harsh, but if you'll permit me, Gandhi said, the only people who do not know that Jesus was nonviolent are the Christians. You can kind of understand why, because if a Christian believed that Jesus was nonviolent, he or she would have to be nonviolent. And he or she doesn't know how that works, doesn't believe it, doesn't know that it has any power. So they get scared and they scurry away from that realization or every time. Now, I think that now we are in the sixth rediscovery. This is the antidote to the sixth extinction, right? Instead of the sixth extinction that wipes out life on Earth, we have to and can now aim at employing the sixth rediscovery that Jesus and Buddha and even Muhammad were nonviolent at heart. So one scholar who's been very kind of leading the pack here, he does brilliant work, is John Dominic Crossan, who has shown that the two interesting things about Jesus that are usually forgotten. One, he was Jewish, and two, that he was nonviolent. There's also a book by someone who's not a professional scholar, but does a wonderful job. His name is Keith Akers, Akers, and he wrote a book with the intriguing title, The Lost Religion of Jesus, the subtitle, Simple Living and Nonviolence in Early Christianity. Akers' reason for doing all this, incidentally, was that he was a very passionate vegetarian and wanted to show that the early Christians were. So now, of course, with Pope Francis and with the recent Vatican meeting on gospel nonviolence, I think we are on our way to a sixth rediscovery. History has shown that these things don't last by themselves. But if we grab hold of it, employ it, and use it for social change in a conspicuous way, this might be the last time that we have to rediscover that Jesus was nonviolent. So that's number three. Number four is that with this growth in nonviolence, uh, it has brought with it some new technologies. For example, and I'm sure David Hartsough is going to light up on this one. We have now an institution known as civilian-based defense. I can remember going to a meeting in Milwaukee or outside of Milwaukee somewhere where this had not been institutionalized yet, except very tentatively by a group called Peace Brigades International. And today, I'm happy to say that there are now 61 organizations worldwide who are practicing civilian-based defense. What they do is they train people in nonviolence and send them into conflict areas where the mere fact that they're there as a third party and the supplementary fact that they're there for peace can in itself have a almost magical effect on conflict. Conflict depends on two parties, me against you. When you break up that image, that model of reality, you're already on the way to some kind of reconciliation. So they are now operating as we speak in 24 countries, and there's even some possibility that they will become involved and effective in the Middle East, in Gaza. That's all just being looked at now. I can remember back in those early meetings, it was winter time, and Mel Duncan kept leaving the meeting and going out and skiing, but he came back enough to get the work done. We asked ourselves then, way back then, could we actually go into Palestine, to Israel-Palestine? And what we decided was that we have to build up to that with civilian-based defense. We have to have enough successes to show that this thing is powerful. It's universally teachable. People can learn how to use it. They can do it. And it's much more effective than violent intervention, of course. And guess what? It's safer. We have an enormous number of people are killed in combat, of course. Beyond that, and this is again an interesting facet of the emerging science of nonviolence, which I think we don't know enough about, is the phenomenon called moral injury. Moral injury means that when you injure another person, nonviolent people won't be surprised about this. When you injure another person, you injure yourself. Right now, uh, military personnel in this country, especially those who have seen combat, are committing suicide at a rate of something like 20 a day. More than 90% of military personnel have been shown to have this specific form of PTSD called moral injury. They have been injured more by what they did to others than what they did to themselves. Did I say that right? They injured themselves more than they injured other people. And the US Army has an interesting attitude towards all of this, which is we won't talk about it. Because the minute you mention it, our whole glorious enterprise is brought into question. And here's where we come in. People will never be willing to renounce militarism, despite the fact that it doesn't work, despite the fact that it's painful for the doer as well as the victim, unless they have an alternative. So this is the critical importance of civilian-based defense and other aspects of nonviolence. What we need to do, and we said that 20 years ago, what we need to do is create a conspicuous win in some area that will demonstrate to people that there is a tremendous option here that we can learn how to use. So those are the four things I think that we have in our favor that could tilt history in the balance of shifting us toward a nonviolent rather than a violent world. And Lee, I'm glad to see you have your cat there. That it's very important, I think, to have our pets be sharing this information with them. Uh, our cat is out in the field somewhere as I speak. But I'm sorry, I'm digressing. So first of all, we have breakthroughs in science that are changing the worldview. It's sometimes called a new story. We have nonviolence itself being scientifically developed. We have the rediscovery, the sixth rediscovery of the nonviolent Jesus, and we have new technologies in which to use nonviolent power. Okay, well, John, do you think I could just take a little bit of time now to run through a few slides and then open it up for questions? Would that work?
Definitely. And you can take as much time as you want. We're all right here with you, listening to you and
Thank you
loving it.
so much.
So go
Thank you.
for it. Whatever you want to do, Michael.
Okay, thanks so much. Okay, here's our slideshow. Uh, my work partner, as the executive director of the Meta Center, and I were going into town one day, Petaluma, to our office, and we spotted this billboard. And I said, Stephanie, stop the car. I need this. I whipped out my cell phone and photographed this billboard because up there at the top in red is the defining mantra of modern civilization. Our pain is your gain. We are separate. You should actually enjoy our pain because you will be gaining thereby. In other words, we are not one. There is no spark of divinity within every one of us, and there's no such thing as moral injury. And this is what we believe. Whether we know it or not, this is a very violent message. And it would be better, I think, if it were obviously violent, but it is the infrastructure for a violent world, predisposing us to believe that we're separate, and not only separate, but so radically separate that I can enjoy, or I can even have to make you suffer in order to flourish. Happy to say that, and we have some hints of this in our film, science has been very good at refuting this recently. Our job is to kind of get that knowledge out of the universities and the laboratories into the world. I think you know who this gentleman is. And I think my favorite quote from Martin Luther King. And it is a direct contradiction of our pain is your gain. Namely, I can never be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be. And you can never be what you ought to be until I am what I ought to be. In other words, competition is an illusion. It's unreal. The world does not advance on a competitive basis, and it'll only be fulfilled when it goes over to cooperation. Okay, here I go again. It's amazing. This is only about the third time I've mentioned Gandhi in practically an hour's talk. But I said before that I wanted to talk a little bit about what kind of violence or what kind of nonviolence Erica Chenoweth and Maria Stephan have been doing their research on. There's a useful concept in the field today, which is the difference between strategic nonviolence and principled nonviolence. What I've been talking about with you all along is principled nonviolence, and Gandhi here gives it a very succinct definition. Nonviolence is the nature of the human. We will not be fully realized as human beings until we discover our nonviolent potential and put it to work. So this is to accept nonviolence as a fundamental principle. Most of the people who participated in those insurrections that Chenoweth and Stefan talk about, who were so successful, were only using strategic nonviolence. How do I know that? Because they're human beings living in the 20th century. They had had no education in nonviolence. So they were adopting it as a strategy, probably under the influence of Gandhi's tremendous demonstration of its effectiveness, but they had not really grounded it in a fundamental reality of our existence. That is yet to come. That, I think, is also something that science is beginning to hint at, and we should really be getting on that bandwagon. Now, an important dimension of this, because it is not the case that to act nonviolently, you need to first be a Gandhi or a king or a Jesus. If that were the case, we would have very few people out there on the street or developing constructive program or what have you. Most of us have difficulties with anger and fear. And actually, our anger, when it arises in response to injustice, is a sacred thing. It is the motive power for social change. But this is the critical point. And I'm going to quote Gandhi with you. I have learned the one supreme lesson to conserve my anger, and as heat conserved is transmuted into energy, our anger controlled can be transmuted into a power that can move the world. That is principled nonviolence at its finest expression, and also in a very practical sense, telling us where it comes from. We take our anger and we have to do two things with it to bring about this transmutation that Gandhi is talking about. So this is really quite useful for us to understand. One, we are not going to direct that anger against persons. Persons can be very violent, but that is how they are behaving. That is how they have been conditioned. That is not who they are. I like to tell a story about a friend of mine who's a peace activist, lives in the South. She used to tell me she was a Holocaust survivor. And one day I said to her, Lily, you're too young. How could that come about? Well, her parents were uh, Jewish Poles. They were Jewish people living in Warsaw who were participating in the underground. And they were betrayed to the Gestapo. Gestapo raided their apartment and discovered incriminating documents and was about to lead them off. When their son, they had this little boy at that time, who was 3 years old, and the little boy, he doesn't see a Gestapo officer. He sees pretty buttons on his uniform. And to the horror of the parents, he actually walked up to this officer and was playing with his buttons. Uh, Dreadful, frightening situation. The man looked down, saw the boy, and when he looked up, his face had completely changed. It had completely softened. And he said, I have a little boy at home, just like him, and I miss him very much. Your son has saved your life. And he walked out of the apartment. So, if there is a humanity, even in a person who has been as violently conditioned as a Gestapo officer, that means that there is that of God in every man, as John Woolman said. And our job is to find it. So when we're angry about an injustice, remember that we're angry about an injustice, not at the people who are operating it. That's one thing. Secondly, we should look for constructive ways to channel that anger. Now, I do this a lot in my life, and I have to say, at no time can I claim that I have actually seen or felt the anger flowing into a different channel. All I know is, let's say I'm very angry about something, some injustice or other, and there's enough of them out there to keep a person angry a lot of the time. And I say, I'm going to do something about this. I'm going to sit down with Stephanie and some of our other friends and do a film on nonviolence called The Third Harmony. And at the end, I find I'm not angry anymore. So the anger went into that constructive channel somehow. I don't know how, and I guess I don't need to. I have the feeling I'm covering a lot of ground with you because you asked me to talk about nonviolence. This is what happens. So, let me show a few more slides and then stop and take your questions. Thank you, John. Uh, Similar statement by King. He discovered the same thing Gandhi did. We caused no outbursts of anger. We expressed anger under discipline for maximum effect. I think that is a tremendously useful formula for us. Okay, so here's how you can check us out. Our basic website is, as John said, metacenter.org. And we have a project now known as the Third Harmony, which consists of a book and a film, which I'm very, very happy about. Making that film was my big transformation of anger. It was, as I said to our editor the other day, this making this film was the most fun I ever had in my life. And the film is called The Third Harmony, Nonviolence and the New Story of Human Nature. Uh, because we have a distributor, I can't just say, here, take it, show it, use it however you want. But we can make different arrangements because he is a an old peacenik himself, actually. So if you have a group you want to show it to, you want to use it as a fundraiser, or you just want to see it, that can all be arranged. I guess I should have put another URL up here. It's info@metacenter.org. If you write to us at info@metacenter.org, that's where Stephanie and I will get that message and hope to respond to you. So I think what I'm actually going to do at this point, despite this fascinating, intriguing model here, I think I'm going to stop sharing and, to the relief of some of you, I suspect, stop talking. And very happy
No.
to
Michael, thank you so much. You touched on so many beautiful, important themes, and we've done almost 100 Zooms here at the Beatitude Center for the Nonviolent Jesus with all kinds of wonderful teachers and witnesses. And you said things that we've never talked about,
Ah,
including the science of nonviolence and a lot about Erica Chenoweth. Been trying to get Erica to do a Zoom for us, but she's so busy.
yeah.
I know people have questions, and I usually have 5 or 10. So you're stuck with me, everybody, as usual. But I'm gonna ask one, and then I'll call on somebody. And
Yeah.
I wouldn't, because there's just so much to talk about, Michael. I have been lately, the last few years, talking about a beautiful sentence I found in Gandhi.
Mm,
And I just want to ask you to talk about it because you use the word consciousness.
yeah.
Uh, and I don't understand that. I don't have anything close to a scientific mind. I have a
Mm.
less than average mind. They always say I have a
Oh no.
kindergarten level. Yeah, Gandhi says nonviolence is the highest conscious state, the
Mm,
highest form of human consciousness. And I find that really exciting. And I've been
Mm,
talking about it and asking people to think about it, but I'm not sure what it means. And you understand the term, and both terms, nonviolence and consciousness
mm,
and mind.
mm.
And so I don't know if you can unpack that beautiful sentence and also bring in some of the stuff you wrote to me, which I put in the e-blast about Gandhi saying that nonviolence is more powerful than all the weapons in the world combined, that it's a
Yeah,
force more powerful. We haven't really even tapped into it. So
mm,
it's the highest form of being a human being.
yeah,
And together, we don't even know yet
yeah,
what it could mean. Like he would say, we're just at the day, who was it? Edison, who discovered
yeah,
electricity.
yeah,
But we don't know yet what we're doing with nonviolence, even
yeah.
though Jesus showed us 2,000 years ago. So
Mhm.
more on that, those beautiful themes.
Oh, those are beautiful, John. Thank you. And I don't know about unpacking it, but I can speak to it somewhat. Uh, Gandhi had a way of looking back at evolution and showing that up to and including early human evolution, uh, things we have evolved. Let me put it this way. We have evolved from a most violent to a through a more violent to a less violent stage. We haven't yet reached a non-violent stage. And his job, he felt, was to demonstrate that such a nonviolent stage is possible. Now, if you simply take what we're seeing today under the label of uh, moral injury and turn it on its head, when you are helpful to people, you experience moral healing. I mean, it's just scientific. You know, if we get injured when we hurt others, we benefit ourselves when we help others. And that benefit is not to be thought of as primarily physical. It will have an impact on our physical being, but it's primarily uh, a state of mind where we feel that we have come home. I think that may be the best way that I can put it. Whenever I feel a sense of disharmony with another person, it creates an agitation in my mind. And that agitation, if not resolved, will in fact have an impact on my body. This much science has also been showing us. But while we have all of these poor servicemen who've been forced to violate their own moral being, committing suicide, I think there are, very, very few cases of people who have been nonviolent and then gotten so agitated by it that they had to do some kind of damage to themselves. This is just one aspect of the fact that when we are helpful and loving to others, we are on the road to discovering who we are.
Well, that's just fantastic. I just wonder, is the question of the mind, like the universal mind, is that coming from Buddha and Buddhism, or Carl Jung,
Carl
or
Jung?
is it just the work of science and the Greeks, as you said, body, mind, and spirit, and all, the Dalai Lama is now doing so much talking about the mind, the mind, the mind, and the science of meditation. And
Yeah,
you're telling us the science of nonviolence.
yeah.
It not only can heal the body, but heal the universal mind. And we don't, Gandhi would also say the spirit too, it would, so
I
where are you
think,
getting all this?
gosh, John, you're asking me to unpack about 40 years of meditating and pondering and reading. I'm not sure exactly where I'm getting it. I'm happy to say that Because I am a meditator, I have been able to just slowly decrease the random agitation of the mind
Mm.
just a little bit. And even that little bit does give a person some insight. So that now, let's say, okay, this is something that does happen. Uh, I'll give you a concrete instance. We had a big meeting here at the community one day, and it was a lunch, and lunch was over. I'm walking across the dining room. There's about 50, 60 people there. And someone says to me, she wants to talk to me. So I stopped to talk to her. And first of all, I'm in an awkward position. I'm bent over and it doesn't feel good. I'm a male. I have a bad lower back. So that's bothering me. Second of all, what she's telling me, I know exactly where she's going. This is unnecessary. Thank you very much, but I don't need to hear this. And I'm struggling and squirming inside. And suddenly it dawned on me, Michael, now what about your belief system? This is a fellow human being who is trying to tell you something. And I zeroed in, I focused on what she was saying in such a way that I could hear what really underlay it, what she really wanted to say. And that capacity has saved me a lot of mental agitation and disruption of relationships. So I really wish I, could carry it out at a higher level and more consistently. But so some of what I've come to understand about this, John, does come from my own experiences.
Oh, that's wonderful. And you're talking about the link between real conscious mindfulness and
Yeah.
nonviolence, I think, in the Thich Nhat Hanh way.
Yes. Uh-huh. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and we need a lot more work on that. Okay, let's look at Bob's question. Hi, Bob.
Sure.
He says, tell us about the new story. Is that, I mean, I don't know that, I'm presuming you're getting that from Joanna Macy, or is that
I,
your,
In his
yeah,
book.
what
So
is it? What do you mean by that? And what is it? The new
yeah.
story?
Yeah, I am in fact getting it from Joanna Macy because we were friends when I was still down in Berkeley. I mean, we're
Right.
still, but I used to see her a lot. But I believe it came from someone else.
Hmm.
I'm not really remembering at the moment who coined the term, but that term, the new story, meant changing over from a world of separateness to a world of unity. It meant no more of this our pain is your gain stuff. Uh, Pulling ourselves back from commercial civilization and the beginnings of a recognition that we are all interconnected. This is one planetary home. What I do here influences to some extent everything everywhere else, which is the fundamental nature of quantum reality, incidentally. Uh, so that is the new story. It switches us from uh, Newtonian physics, Darwinian and behavioral science, and Machiavellian politics to quantum theory, the discovery of the tremendous force of cooperation in nature. Again, a hint of that in our film. And finally, nonviolence. It's hard to imagine a bigger change. And it's not going to happen by itself. I think Arundhati Roy was correct to that extent. But there is every possibility that it can happen. And what we can do is throw our weight onto the side of advancing it.
So I understand you're saying that the new story, in your opinion, means we're a part of the whole universe, not
Yeah.
just that. That's it in a nutshell. Hey,
In,
Michael, you know, the way I've been teaching the Beatitudes, and this is the Beatitude Center, is that
mm,
the third Beatitude, Jesus says 2,000 years ago, blessed are the meek. And Thomas Merton wrote that meekness is the biblical word for Kingian nonviolence. He said that in 1965.
yeah.
But Jesus said 2,000 years ago, those who practice Kingian nonviolence are one with creation.
Yeah. And
That's such, that's
yes.
what you're telling me about the new story, that oneness with the universe and nonviolence are almost the same thing.
Well, and it's not too complicated to understand how that
No,
is.
no.
If I am fully aware that you and I are one, how can I injure you?
Well, if you reject nonviolence
Mhm.
and you're brainwashed into violence,
Mhm.
we're not one with the universe. We're not living in the news story, and we're
And
all about something else. We're living
yeah,
an age-old story of an eye for an eye. Okay, so Jim Dowd, you have a question here about anger toward the former president. So good luck, Michael. I'm going to read it. A major part of my ministry is spiritual direction. And I have been repeatedly hearing about people's anger toward the former president. Is there a different moral point of view toward a leader versus an ordinary person?
oh, I don't know if there's a different moral point of view or a different responsibility toward a leader. I think we can understand people's anger at that person. And what we should try to do is redirect it so that it's not directed against him as a person, but rather the rather horrible ideas that he espoused, and really feel a kind of compassion for him
Yeah.
at having been so badly conditioned that he thinks he benefits from shaming people.
Mhm.
I can't imagine anything more wrong. And it's easy to imagine that he is suffering from that. And so by thwarting his policies, we are benefiting him. It is what Gandhi said about the British. I'm your best friend by getting you to stop doing this to us.
Yeah. Wow.
That we now know that that was even economically true, that it even was costing the British to maintain that wretched empire.
Yeah.
So I
And
hope, yeah, I hope,
you're reminding me of my friends Daniel and Philip Berrigan, and then they were getting arrested and protesting Nixon in Vietnam. They used to say to their friends, "We're his only hope." And
oh,
he said that at the Pentagon. That's where I first heard them say that we're the only hope of the war makers.
yeah,
Is people who stand up and
yeah,
resist them. So somebody said, "Well, what do we do about Reagan? I hate Reagan so much. I'm so angry." And Dan and Phil at one event 40 years ago said, "Oh, that's no big deal. You're doing what Gandhi. You conserve your anger. You channel it into positive thing. You do two things. You pray for them and you resist them."
right,
And I loved that because it was just such a simple thing. But the
yeah.
anger is useless. It doesn't get anywhere. That's what you're trying to teach us into, like Martin Luther King. You just use discipline action to change the country. That's what we need to be doing. Uh,
And
right?
yeah, and believe it or not, it's your anger is doing that, but it's being converted, and I would say reconverted back to its original primal state, which is love.
Oh, it's beautiful. Okay, I get to ask a question. I know you all think I'm doing all the talking, but just I want you to say more about the constructive program because we don't
Yeah,
often hear about that with.
yeah,
And you and I talk about Gandhi and nonviolence so much, but Gandhi was adamant. It's not just protest; and
Yeah.
it's not just meditation, which you and I
Yep.
talk about,
Yep.
and community, very
Yeah.
important. But there's the positive, constructive work,
Yeah.
and I think my one contribution in life toward that is this project I started with Ken Budigan called the Nonviolent Cities Project, where
Yeah.
we're trying to organize cities
Yeah. Yeah.
to organize together under a common vision of a future as nonviolent instead of working in silos. I'm working on the homeless, I'm fighting racism. But if you work together, what is the future of, well, I did this in Cincinnati. What is the future of New Mexico? It's a nonviolent city. But what are your advice to people about uh, helping with a constructive program? As I said, I just came from Tom Gumilton's funeral, and it's
Hmm.
so touching to me because in the 20 years ago, he kind of underwent a conversion and committed almost 1 week a month to living and working in Haiti. And people don't really know all he did. He opened up a clinic that has been really one of the best.
Yeah.
And during the earthquake, during the coups, during all of this, it's continued to go. A lot of hard work, but he was thinking in his mind, I got to have constructive program. So any advice or thoughts to us about how
Yeah.
we can be part of, because I think Jesus has did that too and his all his positive healing and community work. But
Mhm.
how can we do that, Michael?
Great question, John. And I think I think in two ways. At the end of the film, we have five kind of we don't say bullet points anymore. Five points of what people can do. And the fifth one is to ask yourself, what are my capacities? You
Mm-hmm.
know, what are my strengths and weaknesses? I'm not a weightlifter. There are certain things I can't do, certain things I can do. Then look at the world
Mm-hmm.
and figure out where I fit in. The world is like a jigsaw puzzle, and I'm a missing piece. There is some specific way, and this is my faith, if you will. There is some specific way where every single human being can maximize his or her contribution in his or her particular way. But that's the first thing. But the second thing is,
Mm-hmm.
and this responds, John, to what you were saying about the silos. While we're doing constructive program, we should always be ready to explain why we're doing it. In other words, we should situate it in the context of the news story. Because I think that's how human beings change by getting a new idea and seeing it in practice.
Mm-hmm.
So just constructive program, beautiful as it is, and necessary as it is. Well, let me recast that sentence a little bit. If we just do constructive program and then go home and feel good about ourselves, possibly deservedly so, we are not enjoying the full potential. We're not maximizing the impact of what we have done, which would be kind of a pity. So to do it and then explain why we did it and how it works, I think those both components are essential.
I'm writing that down to remember because Dan Berrigan taught me so much about that. That's why I talk so much and do
Mhm.
things like this and write books that it's not just our protesting and all, but we have to communicate our message.
Yeah,
And we're up against a lot of words and ads, as you said. And
yeah.
Phil was arguing against Dan. No, we don't have time for that. We just do it and leave it go. No, and Dan was going,
I think
no,
Dan is right in this case.
we have to write books and give talks, and all of us have to do that.
Yeah,
That's what I hear you saying. Okay,
yeah,
let's go to Ryan's question, and it's about good luck with this, Michael. Capitalism and nonviolence and the link there. So I'm going to read to you what he writes in the chat. This is Ryan. Hi, Ryan. When I think of the area of materialism, quantum physics, science, I can't help but think that it directly challenges capitalism. as a dominant economic model. Can you please speak to the relationship between capitalism and nonviolence? And if you see that we must challenge that system completely, capitalism, if we are to be in line with nonviolence. So does nonviolence require that we stand against capitalism, I guess Ryan is saying.
Yeah, uh,
Yeah.
this is a really controversial thing that I'm about to say, and I beg your indulgence, and I hope you'll understand where I'm coming from. I don't think capitalism is the problem. I th
Okay.
I think greed is the problem.
And what's the difference?
That in capitalism, people who have capital employ it to create manufacturing institutions or what have you. But for example, if you look at the Mondragon cooperatives in northern Spain, and there are several other communities around the world that are imitating them now in Sweden and elsewhere. These are people who are not opposed to the accumulation of capital, but they say, and this is where Gandhi's concept of trusteeship comes in, when you've accumulated capital, you're not supposed to hoard it. You're not supposed to keep it out of circulation. You're supposed to use it for the economic and other benefits of human beings.
Well, that's what
See,
Jesus said, Michael.
well, I'm in good company. What can I say? Gandhi was not in favor of robbing the rich, but rather he was in favor of giving them an awareness of their responsibility. He felt that it was part of human diversity that some people would always have more material wealth than others. That doesn't mean that they're better. If I think I'm better than somebody because I have more money, then I'm identifying myself as a physical creature whose fulfillment comes from accumulating objects. So if I don't have that superstition, suppose I were to come into a lot of money, inshallah, I would then think, how do I use that money for the benefit of others? I would not feel, I hope I can say this in all honesty, I would not feel one iota better for having that stuff. So he was against economic leveling because it was anti-diversity, but he was very, very much in favor of giving people an education in trusteeship. That if I have more, I have more to give, not I have more to own.
Thank you, Michael. I see a hand raised with Frank and then David, and we have
Yeah.
about 15 minutes left. Frank, you want to, I'll
Wow.
unmute you. Huh? Yep, Frank.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah,
A brief question. Go ahead. You can unmute yourself, Frank Ryan.
yeah.
There you go.
Sorry. Thanks, John, and thanks, Michael. It's been a wonderful talk. My question is really, it's just where there is such an injustice as we see now in Palestine, where people have been evicted from their homes effectively, and I think they tried non-violence there by when they walked to the fence, and they were just people
Oh,
were just shot indiscriminately. So I just wonder, how can non-violence work when they're treated so badly?
yeah.
Have you any thoughts on that?
I've been thinking about it day and night, Frank. First of all, I think it's quite important for us to recognize that that was the weakest form of strategic nonviolence. That was not the full picture. That was not beginning to employ the full power that nonviolence has. So let's not make that mistake, which people make every day, and it makes me very unhappy to say that I picked up a protest sign and waved it in the face of that policeman, and I still don't have justice. Uh, no, this is, I think, the great benefit of the scientific vision of nonviolence.
Mm.
that we wouldn't say, that a tiny little force would be enough to move a mountain. We need more. So a tiny little bit of strategic nonviolence is not enough to make a significant impact on society. We need deeper, better nonviolence, which means people have to be trained, they have to be educated, and we have to have a really good strategy. So that was the last part of your question, Frank, and it is a really hard one. What can we do now? Um, I just want to say that if you go on our website, I'm sorry to say I don't have an immediate answer for the question, but I will say that if you go on our website, you'll see that we have a diagram called the escalation curve. If you wait until conflict has reached its most extreme state, which is pretty much what we've got in that part of the world, it will require tremendous sacrifice to undo that violence, to make it go back down. How exactly that is to be done, I don't know. If you just stand there and get shot, it may well not work, as it did not for those marchers. So I will say this, that if we had really funded and developed civilian-based defense with, say, I'm going to make an outrageous claim now. Suppose we took 1% of the military budget, a whole percent, imagine, and devoted that to educating people in nonviolence, giving them training, creating effective institutions. Nonviolence, in the form of civilian-based defense, has worked very well in conflicts that weren't that extreme. What we ought to do now is to point to those examples and say, look, if we did more of it, it could do more for us. I think it's pretty logical. There's a mystery at the heart of things, but the science of nonviolence is also pretty logical.
Thank you so much, Michael. And Gandhi, that's why Gandhi, then I hear you saying, it's such a helpful way to look at this, the science.
Yeah.
It's the same way with with Jesus and Dr. King and
Yeah.
love to experiment publicly. Then we're just scientists and we're gonna give our lives experimenting with nonviolence and step back and see what the outcome is and
Mhm.
study it. And then we're
Yeah.
not all caught up and crazy. We're just experimenters in the truth of universal love and total nonviolence. Well, I want to ask you about that, Gandhi. I've been studying the last 2 years of Gandhi's life this
Mm.
last year.
Mm.
Noah Kali,
Yeah.
Michael.
I just been
So,
reading about it. Yeah.
huh?
I've just been reading The Last Phase by Piara Lal.
I think maybe
Great.
that's what I was reading. I don't remember now because I've been traveling, but it's been very upsetting to me and very powerful. So remember, folks, Gandhi gives his life to get the British Empire to leave India nonviolently. And all along, and this is my question, Michael, is he is gently saying to people, look, this is an all or nothing thing, nonviolence. It's total. And
Mm.
so when he trains the 78 on the Salt March, he trains them for a year and a half to be
Mhm.
killed. It's like for me, a plowshares action. When
Yeah.
you go to a protest, it's not just you're carrying it. This is your whole life. It's Jesus. And so toward when the independence happens and all hell breaks loose, and now they're saying up to 3 million people were killed, Gandhi says, I made a Himalayan blunder. They were not practicing the nonviolence of the strong. It was the nonviolence of the weak. And King later changes that and talks. He's trying to say the same thing in the civil rights movement. He's saying militant nonviolence, aggressive nonviolence. Well, I've been saying this on my speaking tour and getting a lot of pushback. Oh, no, no, no. And I think we, at best, are the nonviolence of the weak in the US.
Yeah.
Except, I mean, or maybe it's white privileged people, but I don't know. There's not much of the kind of all or nothing thing. So
Yeah.
then Gandhi, well, that, and I don't, you can take any of this the way you want, the nonviolence of the strong. What
Yeah.
would that look like now as we're facing Trump coming back and nuclear war and climate change, which is what we need? But he kind of went off to Noah Kali, as I now understand it, in quite great despair
Yeah.
and thinking, well, I got to really see if God really is on the side of nonviolence. And, you know,
No.
he
And
really walked through the massacres with only one other person,
yeah.
and no one knew who he was. And he, city
Yeah.
by city, ended all the killing. And
Yeah.
it's the most spectacular witness of his life.
Yeah.
So, how do we get Michael
Mm.
to this level that he was calling us to, which is what Jesus is calling us to, which is Dr. King calling us to, out of our weakness or whatever, the passivity, really, nonviolent. So I'm nonviolent. Isn't that nice? No, it's almost, we are a scary presence and a threat to the culture of war. So something about the nonviolence of the strong.
Yeah, well, he was very clear that passivity and cowardice were a form of violence, and that violence, as he said, was the most powerful force that humankind has been endowed with. We say that at Meta all the time, but we need to learn how to employ it. Now, to employ it in a desperate situation, like we have in Gaza and like is probably going to happen elsewhere also. I think the power comes from the willingness to die. There's a subtle difference here, John. It doesn't come from dying per se. It comes from your willingness to die. To recognize that you have that capacity in you is to mobilize nonviolent power to a great degree. It also, what it does for me is to motivate me to do more nonviolence so I don't have to die, because I totally do not want to. Um, so actually, when the Himalayan blunder referred to a different episode in the 20s, it was Chowri Chowra, a village up north. Now, I would not say that, okay, I'm a little bit unwilling to say that he went to Noakhali and those other villages in a state of despair. I think he felt, because he elsewhere he said about his life, he said, nonviolence has come among humanity, it will live. He knew that he had created what they call an ocular demonstration of nonviolence, and in time it would have to prevail because love is stronger than hate. You know, the real exists, the unreal doesn't exist. That's a quote from the Bhagavad Gita. So he was in agony of spirit about all the suffering. But he never, I think he never said, I made a mistake, this stuff doesn't work. What we can learn from that is that the British suppression of India had caused them not to develop on their own a culture and a politics of their own, which would very likely have enabled them to discover this principle of nonviolence in their spiritual tradition. Because after all is said and done, India, if it has any special role in the world, as Gandhi thought it did, came from its millennia-long concentration on the spiritual development of the human being. And it was that, I think suppressing that was the worst thing that the British did. And I've actually heard that from some Indians. And incidentally, John, I'm going to now really trot out a theory with you. I think that's what Jesus was doing in Palestine, that the Romans were obliterating the spiritual discoveries of the Jews. And Jesus' job, very much like Gandhi's, was to lift that up and show, no, you've not destroyed it.
That's just so beautiful. I love all of that, Michael. I can
Good.
see that we're at the time, and so I'll give Dave Hartso the last question and word
And
from
then,
Michael. Go
and,
ahead, David. You're up.
and then
Make it a
hopefully,
good one.
Thank you,
Jane,
Michael, for your presentation. Uh, the organization that you and I co-founded was Nonviolent Peace Force, and I thought you maybe meant to mention that as well, which has actually been doing uh, examples of powerful nonviolent intervention and protection around the world. Um, my question is, I was arrested up at Travis Air Force Base blocking uh, workers going in to load bombs on the planes going to Israel to be dropped on Gaza. And this last week, we all had to go up to court. And we had quite a discussion because the 20-year-olds, or people in their 20s, see no reason not to. I mean, they're obviously willing to risk their lives to try to stop the madness in Gaza, but they see no reason not to use verbal violence against the police, and even when the police are, beating us up. And what I realized is there's a whole new generation of people that have not experienced King and Gandhi and really have that deeper understanding of nonviolence.
yeah, yeah,
And I'd just be interested in any thoughts you have, how we kind of share that uh, very
yeah,
deep insights that we gained through being active part of the civil rights movement and the anti-Vietnam War movement, et cetera.
yeah. Phew. I think one of the things we can do, David, is be an example. I can remember back in the free speech movement, sitting side by side, standing side by side with fellow students who were making obscene gestures at not just the police, the university administrators, in some cases, their own professors. And I think to some degree, just being there in a very different mindset is helpful. And I think it's helpful for us to remind ourselves that they really don't want to be doing that. As a nonviolent actor, what we're often doing for people is liberating them to be what they really want to be, even though society is telling them the exact opposite. So personal example, first and foremost, and then secondly, if you get a chance to talk to them, I wouldn't say to them, I think that was an immoral thing to do. But I would say, I think you're compromising your own effectiveness when you do that. Because if you say to an opponent who's being unjust, you are a bad person, he or she will have no motivation to stop being unjust. But if you say to him or her, you are a good person, I'm surprised at you, you don't need to be doing this. That I think can be very effective. So it's when we talk to people, I try to make it a practice to the first thing I say in any kind of altercation with somebody is, I understand where you're coming from. I was walking past a park in Minnesota one time with none other than Mel Duncan, and some guy had gone off his rocker. He was deranged and he was attacking somebody physically. And Mel, being Mel, immediately ran down there to intervene. Mel, incidentally, is the other co-founder of the Nonviolent Peace Force. And the guy is crazy. So how are you going to reach him? Well, Mel stood up, stood in front of him, looked him right in the eye, smiled, and said, "You're a real leader, aren't you?" What? Absolute nonsense. But in fact, what he was doing was giving that guy a stroke. You're saying you're okay. And in our book, we make a lot about the episode with Antoinette Tuff in Decatur, who was a secretary in a school with 800 children, young children, and some poor deranged individual came in with a rifle and a backpack full of an assault rifle, a backpack full of ammunition. He was going to kill the children. And she didn't say, "Oh, you're a horrible person. Don't do this bad thing." She said, You're not the only one who has problems. I have problems too. My husband divorced me. What are we all going to do about this?" She really reached out to the guy. She expressed love to him. And incidentally, later she told a friend of hers, "That was the most terrifying thing I ever been through."
Yeah.
But she did not express that fear, which she was feeling. She expressed compassion, which she was not feeling, but was convinced that it was there and it was the right thing to do. And the guy put down his rifle and she saved all those children. And she
Well,
would not have done it by scolding him and saying, "Give me that gun, you're a bad person."
it's a great story, Michael, and a good story to end on
Yeah.
because
Jane
you're
Marrs.
reminding us that nonviolence works and we can all practice it and conserve our anger and our fear and do the right thing and be compassionate and but also teach it and help young people and experiment it with our lives. And it's just wonderful to hear a teacher of nonviolence take us into new levels of nonviolence. So, dear friends, how about a round of applause for our professor?
May I make one final comment?
You can make two or three, but that's it.
Okay. First of all, I know you have a question, Jane, and if you maybe put it in an email to me, we will try to answer it. And that really leads me to my final comment, which is the next book that we're going to be trying to write. I'm going to write an introductory chapter called My Pilgrimage to Nonviolence.
Mm,
The rest of the book will be responses to questions.
mm,
And on my Facebook page, we have asked people to put in questions, which we will then sort through and construct a book out of that.
wonderful. Is that what? So, under Facebook, is that Meta Center or Michael Nagler
Ooh,
or both? We'll find it somewhere there.
yeah,
Well, we'll look. We'll
def-
all look, and let's all write a question for him, so he can
yeah,
continue to explain to us things.
yeah.
Well,
It,
Michael, this has been great. Thank you so very, very much. I know we could
welcome,
go
John.
on, and maybe we'll have to do it again, and you can
I'm
explain
ready.
more things.
I've
Uh,
already, I don't know any more than that, but I'm ready.
yes, you do. Um,
Great to
so
meet all of you.
yeah, and Michael, we'll be in touch. So just a little commercial announcement then, since we're talking about the ads. I have four more great Zooms in May and June. So on May 11th, it's about a month from now, Pax Christi leader friend Judith Kelly is going to lead a presentation on the life of, buckle your seatbelts, Father Jerzy Papawushi, who led the solidarity movement in Poland. And he was a very incompetent guy who stood up by chance and preached to 5,000 people and really changed Poland and was brutally tortured and assassinated for his work.
Yeah.
And I'm a big fan of his, and Judith is too. She's a longtime Pax Christi person. She's written a book about him. So I invite you to come and learn about him. And then May 25th, I have Wes Howard Brook, Wes is a real scripture scholar from a perspective of nonviolence, and he wrote the definitive, greatest commentary on the Gospel of John ever
Oh,
written. It's 30 years out now, called Becoming Children of God. He's written 3 or 4 other incredible scripture books, and I asked him to do a Zoom, and he wants to do one on his book on the book of Revelation.
mm.
But all the stuff about peace and nonviolence in it, which nobody looks at, and how the end of the world is supposed to be when everybody practices nonviolence. And so that there's no more death, no more killing. That's the reign of God. That's the second coming. And then on June 8th, another great scripture scholar, Bill Wiley Kellerman, is going to talk about his friend, William Stringfellow, a great theologian who died in 1985. And he'll talk about him. Bill's been on before. And then on June 22nd, Rivera's son, my friend from Pace Bene, her specialty is studying where nonviolence movements are happening around the world right now that nobody knows about.
Yeah.
And she studies them every day. And she's going to give like 40 things that are happening in the last 20 years that nobody knows about, of all these kind of victories of nonviolence. Well, I'm looking forward to hearing that, because we need
Yeah.
this kind of hopeful stuff. And Rivera is kind of an amateur Erica Chenoweth who just does this on her own, and it's wonderful. So come again, okay? And I'll be leading a retreat on my book if you want to come for a weekend near Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania, about an hour from New York, in a couple of weeks. Kirkridge.org, May 3rd, 4th, and 5th, if you're interested. So we'll say goodbye to Michael and a big thank you. And thanks very much, everybody, for
Bye,
being
everyone.
here. Be well. Have a good day and week and Easter season. And we'll see you some other time. Okay. Peace be with you all. Thank you so much. God bless you, Mike. I'll be in touch.
Thank you,
See you all
John.
next time. I have to sign off, so I'm signing off.
Thank
And
you. Thank you.
next time. Okay.
Very
Bye-bye.
welcome,
Thanks,
everyone.
Michael. You did great.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
I really enjoyed it. That's for
Good.
Great.